October the 15th, and we are at the Sumpter Valley Railroad in Sumpter, Oregon, and it's 6:30 in the morning. This is an all-day, 8-hour excursion. In fact, it's a 9-hour excursion, 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. Pulled by a Shay locomotive, and it's a narrow gauge, wood-fired Shay locomotive, narrow gauge versus the standard gauge. These mounds of gravel were created by the Dredge. They were dredging years ago for gold. They tore up this whole valley. Dredged up this entire valley, mile after mile. We're on a refueling stop and a potty break for the passengers. You can see wood-burning logging locomotives were very, very labor-intensive. Many of the viewers will remember Buster Keaton's The General, where they were burning wood ties and anything else to make that engine go.
Well, back in the day, in the Sumpter Valley, all their locomotives on the main line and the logging line burned wood. And there were piles of wood about every 6 miles along the track, put there by workers. And I've got a pay stub in 1913 that the railroad paid these workers to cut the trees, split the trees, buck the trees, and then haul and stack the wood next to the rail site, the princely sum of 5 cents per cord in 1913. And they did that 24/7 every day of the year, winter, summer, rain, snow, ice, stack the wood, because that's the only way the trains would keep on running.
And the Sumpter Valley was how long? 80 miles?
82 miles from Baker City all the way to the end of the track at Prairie City when it got there to Prairie City. It went over 3 mountain passes to get to Prairie City. The first pass is Larch Summit, then it goes to Tipton Summit, and then finally Dixie Summit, and it drops down into Prairie City. But if you took the passenger train from Baker City all the way to Prairie City, it's usually a 14-hour ride.
Now, did they have a snow plow at all on the line, or?
The engines, some of the engines had flanges that they would push in front of them. They did have some plows for the deep part of the winter. Sometimes when the railroad was snowbound with real deep snow, they would enlist some of the logging locomotives from the logging line and add those in to the passenger train itself, just to push the plows.
Now
they were manual plows.
They run one passenger train a day?
Well, actually ran in the heyday in the between 1905 and 1920. They would run usually about a dozen passenger trains, some of them just short trips out to Whitney and back, some of them to Sumpter and back, some of them all the way to Prairie City, some from Prairie City backwards. So there wasn't all just one big train each day. There was usually a half a dozen trains.
This is in the caboose, and these are the conductor brakeman seats. See, there's stairway going up. We're doing another run by on a pond. I elected to stay on board in the second caboose. Backing up one more time for another photo run by on that pond. Museum showcase across the street. This is the headquarters for the Sumpter Valley Dredge Company. This is the Dredge. It's a museum type thing.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
All of the food that is being served today was supplied, and all of this was done by our Friends of the Dredge. That is our volunteer group that assists us with all kinds of wonderful things that we do here at the Dredge.
Well, it was good.
They run the store, they do all of these kinds of events. They help us to raise money for the Dredge, so...
Now, is the Dredge open daily or just on the weekend now?
It's open every day, May 1st through October 31st. It's open every day from 8 until 5, except in October we shut it down at 4 o'clock in the evening, but it's open 7 days a week.
Okay, thank you.
Yum!
That's hot taco soup and strawberry rhubarb pie for dessert and pop, and not bad. It's better than I expected. I expected a deli sandwich and an apple in a brown paper bag.
Welcome to the Sumpter Valley Dredge. My name's Ranger Kevin. I'll be your orator for about the next 3 or 4 minutes. I'll try to make it brief so we can get back to eating. If you're interested, there's a restroom out in the parking lot. It's that little tan building. Feel free to come and go or completely ignore me and continue eating if you like. Basically, the last of the season, historically, is about the harvest. About the culmination of many months' work finally ending. And usually it would be a time like this where people would come together, share food, and more importantly, share stories. History and historic places like the Dredge and like the engine are maintained so that we can learn from the past and so that we can remember it and to help keep it alive. And so this season, you know, the dredge workers and the people that have worked on the train and the people from the community, we have a lot of stories from the things that we've done, the adventures we've gone on, the people we've met, the things we've marked off that huge to-do list that I swore was never going to end. And so we've come together to share some food and to share the stories from the season. Because by adding our stories to the work that we do, we help to create history. And by coming together to share the stories with one another, we help to pass on that history and the traditions. And so, even if the dredge, or like I mentioned, the engine was historic, and we know the stories that the dredge workers told one another, by telling each other our stories, we can add to the mythos of these places, and so build upon the foundation that history has given us. So, I was going to have a glass for this part, but if we could all raise our glasses or our cans or what have you. Here's to this season. It's been one for the record books. And here's to the next season. May she blow this one out of the water. So as you're eating, tell each other stories and have a good old time.
Thank you.
There's 2 or 3 of them all together.
Hey Dredge, my name's Kevin. I'll be your tour guide today, and we'll do kind of a quicker version so you guys can go get back on the train. Basically, we're going to talk about how, I'm trying to figure out which parts to cut out. We're going to talk about this ginormic boat, and it is a boat. We'll talk about how it's basically a 250-ton floating, mobile gold pan. And so we'll talk about all those different things. To start off, it is a boat, or it was a boat at one point. It doesn't float any longer, but it's a boat that doesn't go in reverse. How it works is they would build the boat on the side of the pond, attach some of the basic machinery to it, and then launch it into the pond ship style. And there are actually pictures of the christening. There was a bottle of champagne smashed on the hull, whole 9 yards. It's pretty entertaining. And so after it had been launched in, then they built the rest of it on it. This is the 3rd dredge in the area. It was built about 10 years after the other 2 had shut down, and so most of the machinery on this one was transferred from the first one that was in the area. We'll basically talk about how it moved, or how it dug rather, how it moved, and then how it separated out the gold. So we'll hit the really high points. We'll leave out some of the other stuff. So it digs by constantly having this bucket line going, and that's what it's called. It's called the bucket line because it's a line of buckets. It works on the same basic premise as a chainsaw, or like kind of a bicycle chain. All the buckets are linked, and there's a very large gear system inside that continually pulls the buckets, so the buckets are continually scooping material. And they would be able to sort through they would scoop rather, about 7 cubic yards of material per minute. So they were sorting through a very, very large quantity of soil. And as I mentioned before, the boat doesn't go in reverse. It only goes side to side and forward. And it does that by, okay, so I'll be the dredge for a second. You've got the buckets that are constantly going, and the arm that the buckets are attached to doesn't go side to side. It just goes up and down. And so to get the buckets to go side to side, they actually pull the entire boat left and right. And they do that by attaching cables to the boat at the front, out to the sides of the pond, and pulling on cables one way or the other. So if you pull on the cable, then you cut to the left. Pull on the other cable, cut back to the right.
Now, what did they have? A winch
Yeah.
on the shore? Okay.
Yeah, they're inside, and we'll show you those. Basically, they just work back and forth. They cut down about 6 inches at a time, down to 18 feet deep, and they raise the whole thing up. And then they pull winches that are attached to cables that are attached way out ahead of them. There's one that's way up by the office, up by the highway there. They were way far out ahead, and they would pull on both of those and move the boat forward. Drop the buckets back down, move side to side, and slowly serpentine their way through the valley. So we'll head inside, and I'll show you.
Now, how many miles did they dredge? How many miles valley?
About 8 square miles.
About 8 square miles. Okay.
This dredge started about 2 miles down, worked its way down to about the tip of Phillips Lake, and then back up here.
Who owned the property at that time? Was it federal control and then just got
No, actually they had to purchase the land in order to dredge it at the time. And so those two things multiple times because they had to purchase the land. It was hydroelectric power. There was a power plant about 19 miles away called the Fremont Powerhouse that drew water from Olive Lake to create hydroelectric power, and they would bring it down directly to the dredges. There was electricity for the dredges 37 years before residents in the valley had electricity in their homes.
I was going to say, electricity wasn't invented until like the late 1800s, wasn't it?
And they started dredging here in either 1908 or I think it was 1908. This one didn't start until 1934. But so up at the front, we talked about how the dredge dug. And so while now we're back here, we'll talk kind of about how it moves, and then also what it does with the material after it sorts. So all the material goes up the bucket line into the main part of the dredge, and we'll talk about that part when we get in there. It sorts out the gold, and then all the refuse material comes out this long tail. And on the inside of the tail, you can't see, it's basically just a really long conveyor belt. All the material would be dumped into the conveyor belt, out to the back, and then dropped out. So then getting back to how the dredge moved, we talked about how it moved side to side. And what I didn't tell you was that it works by cutting off of an arc off of a pivot. So there's a very large anchor here that I'll step out of the way so you guys can see, but they would drop this anchor, and from that they would pull on those two cables back and forth to dredge up the material. And this anchor here is called a spud. It's basically just a 40-ton I-beam with a pointed end on it. They would raise it up into the gear systems that you can see up there, and then just drop it. And between dropping it and the action of moving back and forth, it would wiggle its way down into the soil. So if you get, I think the only place you can see it is right here. So we'll just kind of shuffle people through and. The third one, the machinery from that one sat in the pond for about 10 years, and then was brought and added to this hull to create this dredge. And so all of the winches were operated by the gentleman that was in the room just above us, and you can see all the linkages that go up there. And he was called the winchman, and he made about $1.06 an hour after World War II, which was pretty good money from what I hear. And so every other day, they had to make sure that it was warm enough in here that the water wouldn't freeze. You can see this tan shielding here that goes along the length of the boat. The material would be dropped in at the left-hand side there, and would travel behind that shielding. And what is behind that shielding is a 6-foot wide cylinder. It's about 37 feet long, and it has little holes cut in it. And that would be constantly spinning. They would flush about 3,000 gallons of water per minute across that material inside the constantly spinning device to wash the soil.
Depot Inn. I'm headquartered out of here for 3 days. Good, clean motel. Prices are very reasonable. And done the train ride today and the dredge tomorrow. I'm going to go from here to Baker City, spend the day in Baker City doing 2 museums up there, the Covered Wagon Museum and then their Heritage Museum. Now, you're going to be seeing the entire downtown area of Sumpter, Oregon. We're looking south, turn around across the street, and now we're looking east, and now we're looking north. And that is Sumpter, Oregon. Well, they're going to fuel up and water up, and they're going back for another hour excursion. But in the meantime, they're going to switch cars, do something with cars to get the engine turned around. Talking with a train buff back in the caboose, and he tells me that air pump is off his Shay locomotive on his farm outside of Tacoma, Washington. This train crew came down middle of the week and took the air compressor off in his Shay and brought it up here. They wouldn't be running today. Their air compressor went out totally, and they didn't have time to rebuild it. So they have to make parts for it in the machine shop. But they're going to rebuild their own compressor, and then they'll give this train buff back his compressor and put it back on his Shay. This is truly a wonderful experience. It's well worth the time and effort to come over and take this changing foliage special run.